Theresa May has responded to her government's crushing defeat on Brexit, the biggest in parliamentary history, by rejecting calls from Labour for a general election. Ahead of tonight's no-confidence vote, the Prime Minister indicated that while she was prepared to reshape her plans, she wouldn't consider significant changes. Business leaders have registered their concerns about the political impasse, saying, with the UK leaving the EU in 72 days, there's a need for compromise. The Old Bailey has been told that the crash of a vintage fighter jet at a Sussex airshow, killing 11 men, was down to pilot error. 14 people are now known to have died in an attack by militants on a luxury hotel in Nairobi. Another 50 are unaccounted for. It's understood that a member of the SAS helped to secure the site. Hard on the heels of last night's resounding and unprecedented defeat on her EU withdrawal deal, Theresa May has faced growing calls from across the Commons and within her cabinet to rethink her approach on Brexit. Opening a debate on a motion of no confidence in the government, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn accused the Prime Minister of leading a zombie administration. He said she'd failed to reach across party lines and should resign. Theresa May, who's expected to survive tonight's vote because the DUP and Conservative rebels have pledged their support, insisted that holding an election would deepen divisions and cause chaos. Our first report tonight is from our assistant political editor, Norman Smith.
Despite suffering an historic defeat, there's no sign Theresa May is poised to lose tonight's confidence vote and be plunged into a general election. Instead, her backbenchers and the DUP, who 24 hours ago helped inflict that crushing reverse, today rallied behind the Prime Minister. This despite continuing bitter divisions over her Brexit strategy. Mrs May pledged to reach out across parties to try and forge a fresh consensus. But the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, told MPs every previous Prime Minister in her position would have resigned.
It's now clear this government is not capable of winning support for its core plan on the most vital issue facing this country. The Prime Minister has lost control, and the government has lost the ability to govern.
Mrs May was helped, however, by the very public protestations of support from some of her most fervent Brexit critics, among them the Tory MP Mark Francois.
I'm a Conservative first and last. And I know opportunism when I see it. Exactly. So can I tell her when the bells ring, the whole of the ERG will walk through the lobbies with her to vote this nonsense down?
Repeatedly, Mrs May was challenged over what compromises she was prepared to make, but again and again rebuffed such appeals, ruling out a customs union, a second referendum or any delay to Brexit.
What I want to see is what the British people voted for. They want to see... No, this is very important. They voted for an end to free movement. They voted for an independent trade policy. They voted to end the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. And it is incumbent on this Parliament to ensure that we deliver on that.
Number 10, meanwhile, appeared to reject including Jeremy Corbyn in cross-party talks. Mrs May did, however, speak to Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. Ms Sturgeon said she feared Mrs May was intent on sticking to her deal.
She doesn't seem to have any clear idea herself of what the next steps are. And secondly, it didn't seem to me as if she was prepared to abandon or move any of her red lines in order to open space for new ideas or new approaches to be brought forward.
There are also clear signs of disquiet among some senior Tories, including cabinet ministers, the Justice Secretary David Gauke.
I don't think we can today be boxing ourselves in. What we need to be doing is engaging across Parliament, seeing what ideas emerge, where the support is for those particular ideas, and something which could have the majority support in the House of Commons.
Whatever Mrs May's reservations about abandoning her deal, such is the widespread unease over a possible no-deal Brexit, Parliament could yet intervene to force the Prime Minister, however reluctantly, across her red lines.
Since last night's vote, 71 Labour MPs have signed a letter urging their leader Jeremy Corbyn to back another referendum on withdrawal from the European Union. The party's official policy keeps the option of a second referendum on the table if it cannot secure a general election. However, it appears that some MPs are becoming impatient and want Mr Corbyn to commit to a people's vote immediately. One warned that if he continued to sit on the fence, the party leader was in danger of getting splinters in places he didn't want. Our political correspondent Ben Wright has this report.
Repeatedly calling for a general election while accusing the government of botching Brexit has given Jeremy Corbyn space to keep his own position vague. Precision about next steps could wait so long as an election remained possible. But if the government wins tonight's confidence vote, the Labour leadership will be under pressure to spell out its plan. Polling suggests a majority of party members want another referendum. So do dozens of Labour MPs. One, Chris Leslie, urged Jeremy Corbyn to move quickly and support a so-called people's vote.
That's the promise that I think a lot of Labour supporters, the public, will be focused upon, because we will be coming back to the votes in the Commons next week on a motion. It will be amendable, and I think a people's vote is clearly the way through the impasse. So my point to Jeremy Corbyn is you really, really have to move to that place now.
But the Labour leader shows no sign of hurrying towards another referendum. Instead, shadow cabinet ministers have suggested the government could face a series of confidence votes in the coming weeks, rather than plumping for a new public poll. Cross-party talks also seem likely, and the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, said if a repackaged Brexit deal contained a permanent customs union with the EU, allowing for tariff-free trade, and a closer relationship with the single market, that could secure Labour support. The Labour MP Lucy Powell said around half the Parliamentary Labour Party was very worried about another referendum.
There are many other things that we need to explore first. I think the country is desperate for Parliament to come together and agree something. And I think even in the circumstances where we're having a second referendum, we still need to have a view about what leave actually was and what we were putting to the people. And we're a long, long way off that.
The opposition's position will be crucial in the days ahead. Considering the depth of hostility to Theresa May's deal on the Tory backbenchers, the Prime Minister may yet need help from some Labour MPs to get a Brexit deal through the Commons.
The business organisation, the CBI, urged politicians to find a compromise and rule out a no-deal Brexit. The British Chambers of Commerce said its members were expressing anger and despair at the amount of money they were having to spend on contingency measures. Our economics correspondent, Darshini David, assesses the reaction.
Businesses are stepping up contingency plans for no deal, with fewer than 50 working days to go to Brexit. Some manufacturers are stockpiling goods to avoid disruption to supply chains. And financial services companies are staffing subsidiaries across Europe. As their bills mount, business groups are pushing for more clarity. Claire Walker from the British Chambers of Commerce says the situation is now critical.
Business are united in calling for no deal to be taken off the table, and also for there to be a clear and very, very quick plan which can get the consensus of the House.
Businesses are used to tough last-minute negotiations, but many are worried that their profits may be at risk as the political deadlock continues. Procter & Gamble, which manufactures household staples like Fairy Liquid and Pampers nappies, has warned that the price of its products could increase if there's no deal. Its chief executive is David Taylor.
Anything that restricts our ability to move products back and forth, things we make in the UK for UK consumers and EU consumers, or things we make in the EU that are for EU consumers and UK consumers, if it's a hard exit, it's going to drive cost in the system.
The anxiety shown by businesses is in contrast to the relief seen on the financial markets. As the Bank of England Governor Mark Carney pointed out, sterling rose after last night's vote, as city traders bet that the chances of a disorderly exit had diminished.
European leaders have maintained the pressure on Theresa May, insisting it's up to her to come forward with fresh proposals. But the German Chancellor Angela Merkel said there was still time for further negotiations. From Brussels, here's our Europe correspondent, Damien Grammaticus.
In Brussels and capitals across Europe, there is a sense that a fog of confusion has enveloped London, so EU leaders have been left peering through it, searching for clarity. In Berlin, Angela Merkel said it was up to the British side to say what was going to happen. In Strasbourg, the EU's chief negotiator Michel Barnier said the EU would not reopen negotiations on the withdrawal agreement already reached with Theresa May, and as there was now no clear majority in the UK Parliament for any alternative plan, the Brexit process had ground to a halt.
C'est maintenant au gouvernement britannique de clarifier comment le Royaume-Uni veut procéder.
It's now for the British government to clarify how the United Kingdom wishes to proceed in organising the orderly withdrawal which it requested, and how, beyond this orderly withdrawal, it wants to build an ambitious and long-lasting partnership, he said. And he added a backstop solution for Ireland has to remain in any deal. But the Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar indicated there were ways to avoid the UK leaving the EU with no deal, including a shift to the UK's red lines.
We've always said that the risk of an unplanned, disorderly Brexit at the end of March can be avoided, including, if necessary, by an extension of the Article 50 deadline. This will be subject to a request from the UK being made and agreed by all member states.
But France and Germany both made clear that any delay in the UK's departure date would only be considered if the UK comes up with a realistic plan that had a chance of passing Parliament in Westminster. So little clarity in the fog.
If, as expected, Theresa May wins tonight's vote, she'll hold talks with other parties in the coming days. Downing Street has indicated that she'll return to the Commons next week with fresh proposals. Our deputy political editor, John Pienaar, has been considering the chain of events that's brought the Prime Minister to this point.
Brexit's a mess, hard to argue with that, but is that Theresa May's fault and hers alone? Proof of historic incompetence? She invoked Article 50, set the clock ticking towards Brexit Day immediately after calling a snap election she failed to win cleanly. Bad timing looking back on top of an undeniably poor campaign. Hardly a triumph for Mrs May. But Brussels was refusing to discuss the future after Brexit till the divorce deal was settled, a trial of strength which Brussels won. Could she have weighed the relative weakness of her government and tried for a softer Brexit early on? Maybe, but that would also have triggered the Brexiteer rebellion much sooner, might have broken her party, consigned the Tories to oblivion. Instead, she's accused of appeasing Brexiteers and changing tack at the last moment. A Tory schism may yet happen. Her hope is her plan becomes the last one standing, that Brexiteers back her rather than risk no Brexit at all. Mrs May is now more often accused of stubbornness than credited with strength, a tactician with no strategy. Barring a political miracle, she could easily be blamed by historians for a series of bad calls at a defining time. But any solution to Brexit would amount to an achievement in itself. If it's Mrs May's, she'll have earned and she'll get all the credit and more. It would also mean politics had become the art of the almost impossible.
The trial has begun of a former RAF and British Airways pilot whose vintage fighter plane crashed onto a road during the Shoreham air show in West Sussex in 2015, killing 11 people. The jury at the Old Bailey was told that the crash was caused because of serious negligence by Andrew Hill. He denies 11 charges of manslaughter by gross negligence. Tom Simons was at court and sent this report.
The Old Bailey was told there was nothing wrong with the Cold War-era Hawker Hunter jet. The pilot, Andrew Hill, was described as experienced, but someone prepared to take risks. Prosecutors said his flying that day was seriously negligent. He'd been attempting a manoeuvre known as a bent loop. It began with a sharp climb from 185 feet to 2,800. The jury was told that was 1,000 feet too low for such a manoeuvre. Yet Mr Hill carried on, turning upside down and flying towards the ground. He was too low and too slow to pull up. He crashed on the busy A27 near Shoreham, where crowds had gathered to watch the show, including some of the men who died. Others were in passing cars. Mr Hill was lucky to survive, but has no memory of what happened. He's expected to say he may have suffered the effects of G-force. He denies all the charges.
The authorities in Kenya are trying to trace dozens of people who remain unaccounted for following a siege at a hotel and office complex in Nairobi. The country's president, Uhuru Kenyatta, says 14 people are known to have been killed. Among them was a British man who's been named as Luke Potter. The Kenyan authorities say the attackers, thought to be Somali Islamists, were all killed in a security operation that also involved a member of the British SAS. Our correspondent Andrew Harding has sent this report from Nairobi.
Grieving Kenyans searching for relatives today at a Nairobi morgue, amid concerns here that the official death toll could soon rise. The Red Cross says it's still trying to trace 50 people reported missing. But overnight and early this morning, to a soundtrack of gunfire, hundreds of civilians were ushered to safety, many confused and traumatised.
They come shooting, people were scared. Where is it from?
We don't know where everyone is, we don't know what's happening.
The hotel siege lasted 19 hours. Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta was quick to praise his country's sometimes fiasco-prone security forces.
I want to commend the quick and effective response by all our fighting teams for neutralising all the terrorists involved in the attacks.
The Kenyan authorities, anxious about their tourism industry, insist they are winning the battle against the chaos and extremism that spills over the border from neighbouring Somalia. But there's a long way to go. In the meantime, Britain has been touched directly by this latest incident. Among the dead was Luke Potter, who'd been working in Nairobi for a charitable foundation. He was described as a calm and determined man. And among those who helped in the rescue operation was an unnamed SAS soldier in Kenya on a training mission.
You're listening to the 6 o'clock news on BBC Radio 4. The main news so far. With MPs preparing to vote on a motion of no confidence in the government, Jeremy Corbyn has accused Theresa May of running a zombie administration. She's responded to last night's defeat on Brexit by rejecting calls for a general election. Still to come, the academy pupils with Oxbridge in their sights. The trial of the man in charge of policing on the day of the Hillsborough disaster in Sheffield in 1989 has heard that the stadium's safety certificate was out of date. David Duckenfield denies gross negligence manslaughter, leading to the deaths of 95 Liverpool fans. Our North of England correspondent Judith Moritz reports from Preston Crown Court.
When Liverpool were drawn against Nottingham Forest in an FA Cup semi-final in 1989, the Hillsborough ground in Sheffield was chosen as the venue. At the time, it was the third largest club football ground in England. Today, the jury heard that its safety certificate was very out of date. In the decade after it was drawn up in 1979, alterations were made to the stadium, but its capacity figures weren't recalculated. Prosecuting Richard Matthews QC said few of those involved with the safety certificate appear to have performed their function diligently. Graham McCrell, the Sheffield Wednesday safety officer, was said either to have turned a blind eye to it or to have neglected his duties. Mr McCrell denies 2 offences under safety legislation. His co-defendant, David Duckenfield, was the police officer in overall command. He denies the gross negligence manslaughter of 95 Liverpool fans who were fatally crushed on overcrowded terraces. The 96th victim, Tony Bland, is not included in the prosecution as he died 4 years later. The trial continues and is expected to last 4 months.
A hitman has been found guilty at Liverpool Crown Court of the murders of 2 prominent gangland figures. Mark Fellows, who was nicknamed the Iceman, shot dead Paul Massey with a submachine gun 3 years ago. He then targeted John Kinsella last year in what was described as a cold-blooded execution. Our correspondent Karen Allen has been following the case.
Security was stepped up as the jury at Liverpool Crown Court found 38-year-old Mark Fellows guilty of the horrific murders of 2 big-time criminals in what was described as a long-running feud between 2 rival gangs in Salford. The court heard how Fellows gunned down Paul Massey, a so-called Mr Big in the criminal underworld, shooting him dead outside his home in 2015. 3 years later, the dead man's associate, John Kinsella, was gunned down after Fellows, riding past on a bicycle, fired at him and his pregnant partner at close range. As Kinsella lay dying, the court heard how his killer stood over him and fired 2 more shots into the back of his head. The killer's accomplice, Stephen Boyle, was found guilty of John Kinsella's murder. His role was to act as spotter and provide backup in the event of the planned murder going wrong. Both men turned to the gallery and smiled as the verdicts were read out. They're expected to be sentenced tomorrow.
The US-led coalition in Syria has confirmed that a number of American troops have been killed in a suicide attack while on patrol in the north of the country. The Islamic State group says it carried out the bombing in the city of Manbij. A number of local residents also died. Activists in Zimbabwe say hundreds of people have now been arrested in 3 days of protests against a fuel price rise and shortages of basic goods. Those held include a prominent anti-government pastor. Reports are also emerging of a severe crackdown by the authorities. Our correspondent Shingai Nyoka reports from Harare.
Many of those under arrest have been accused of inciting public violence, but their families say they are innocent.
She says my brother was wearing a vest and the police suspected he was one of the protesters. But he was returning from buying cement. He has his receipts with him to prove what he was doing.
It's not fair for him because people are there who did that. They are out there. The ones who, most of them who are arrested, they are not part of the thing. So they must look, even use footage or something like that, then arrest the right people.
One of those arrested is the prominent activist Pastor Mawarire, who used social media to encourage people to join a stay-at-home protest. He's also being charged with inciting public violence. His lawyer is Beatrice Mtetwa.
We've asked for full particulars, when, how. They say they don't know. They'll give that to him at the police station. We've asked how asking for people to stay away can constitute incitement to violence. But of course, this is a new dispensation.
The 3-day national shutdown has brought the country to a standstill, with many families struggling to find supermarkets open to buy food. The strike is due to end today, but many Zimbabweans are wondering whether they should return to work tomorrow, given that the prices haven't been reduced.
A senior lawyer has been arrested in Israel as part of an investigation into claims that judicial positions have been traded for sexual favours. The police launched the inquiry after receiving information about the appointment of a female magistrate and an attempt to promote a male judge. The parents of a 3-year-old girl have gone on trial accused of female genital mutilation. Their daughter was taken to hospital in London with severe injuries in the summer of 2017. A 42-year-old Ghanaian man and a woman who's 37 and originally from Uganda, who can't be named for legal reasons, deny the charge. Our correspondent, Adina Campbell, reports from the Old Bailey.
Setting out their case in court, prosecutors said that the 3-year-old girl told her carer that she'd been cut by a witch weeks after she was treated in hospital for serious genital injuries. The jury were told that her mother had an interest in witchcraft, and during a police search, cow tongues and ingredients for spells were found in her freezer at home. The 999 call made by the girl's mother was also played to the jury. She was heard saying that her daughter had injured herself after falling onto a kitchen cupboard while climbing to reach for biscuits. But 3 doctors who treated the girl told the court that these injuries were consistent with female genital mutilation. The trial's expected to last for 3 weeks.
The rate of inflation has fallen to its lowest level for almost 2 years. In the year to December, the rate, as measured by the Consumer Prices Index, stood at 2.1%, down from 2.3% in November. Here's our economics correspondent, Andy Verity.
With inflation at 2.1%, the cost of living's rising more slowly than it has in nearly 2 years. That's in large part down to falling petrol prices, which dropped by more than 6% between November and December. That downward pressure was offset by rising prices for items such as hotels, mobile phone charges, toys, games and food. Energy prices were one of the fastest rising elements in the cost of living, with gas bills up more than 7% over 12 months and electricity up 9%. However, a price cap on energy that came into force 2 weeks ago should help to curb future rises. And there's little sign of inflationary pressure in the pipeline, with prices paid by producers for their supplies also rising more slowly than before. When you strip out volatile items such as food and fuel to get so-called core inflation, it too is benign at just 1.9%. That means there's little pressure for a further rise in interest rates, at least not in the first half of this year. On the markets, traders are now betting that won't happen before September.
In the city, the 100 share index closed down 32 points at 6,863. In New York a short time ago, the Dow Jones was up 141 points at 24,206. On the currency markets, the pound was up 1 cent against the dollar at $1.28.6. Against the euro, it was up 0.9 cents at €1 and 12.9 cents, making a euro worth 88.6 pence. A state school in one of the country's most deprived areas has revealed that 41 of its students have been offered places at Oxford and Cambridge. Many of those pupils at Brampton Manor Academy in Newham in East London are from ethnic minority backgrounds. The school, which has had a sixth form only since 2012, is bucking the trend. Research late last year suggested Oxbridge recruited more pupils from just 8 private schools than from almost 3,000 state schools put together. Ushma Mistry from the BBC's Asian network has been along to the school.
So that is a statement, but why does that not...
A typical lesson at Brampton Manor Academy in East London.
Okay, what's lacking?
41 students from here have been offered places at Oxford and Cambridge. Perhaps not a big deal for some schools, but a massive one for Brampton, because this school is in the London borough of Newham, the third poorest area in the country, and nearly half of its population are Asian. 2/3 of the 41 would be the first in their family to go to university, like Melissa, who could be going to Oxford to read philosophy, politics and economics.
I didn't know if I would get in because it is quite prestigious for sure.
Most of the pupils, like Elora, have English as a second language. She only arrived in the UK when she was 15. She's hoping to convert her offer into a place at Cambridge to do engineering.
Now, I had like the basic English lesson from Italy, but it's not like I could speak English that well.
This year has been the best one yet for the number of pupils being offered places at Oxbridge.
My name's Sam Dobin, I'm the Director of Sixth Form at Brampton Manor Academy. Back in 2012 we opened, we had one offer in that first year and it's progressed since then. Last year 20 went and this year 41 have got places, which we're just absolutely delighted by.
The Sixth Form is selective based on academic merit. They get 2,000 to 3,000 applications for the 300 places per year, and most of the pupils who attend are from disadvantaged backgrounds.
12 British people from the same family are facing deportation from New Zealand because of claims of bad behaviour. The family from Liverpool are accused of not paying restaurant bills, theft, littering and threatening conduct. The family attracted attention in New Zealand after footage emerged of them leaving beer bottles and other rubbish strewn on a beach. The family say they were made to feel very unwelcome and will cut short their holiday. Andy Murray, who's indicated he might retire this year because of injury, has criticised the governing body of British tennis for failing to properly promote the sport. He said the Lawn Tennis Association hadn't capitalised on the successes of the past few years. Our sports editor Dan Roan reports.
This is not the first time Andy Murray has criticised those in charge of British tennis. However, with the 31-year-old on the brink of retirement, his words carry extra weight. The 3-time Grand Slam champion says the LTA has failed to capitalise on the success that he and other British players have enjoyed in recent years to grow participation. He said he was shocked so few indoor courts had been built in Scotland during his career. Murray's mother, Judy, who was key to her son's development outside the LTA system, has echoed his concerns.
I think we've converted a lot of people into watching the game, both on television and you can see it in the Davis Cups. There's a lot of travelling support now, there's a lot more fans perhaps travelling. But we've got to open the game up to make it more affordable, more accessible to more people. We've got to take it into places where it perhaps currently doesn't exist.
So do the Murrays have a point? There were 8 British players in the Australian Open singles draw this year, the most for 21 years. But at the grassroots, the numbers are less encouraging. 487,000 people participated in tennis once a week in 2008. But by 2016, when Murray claimed his second Wimbledon title, that had dropped by almost 90,000. There's been a further decline of almost 3% over the last year. The LTA says 60,000 new children have tried tennis since 2015 and £19 million is spent on participation annually, around a third of total expenditure. They also point out that tennis is not the only traditional sport facing a struggle to maintain popularity. But some feel that if the LTA is to build on the legacy of Britain's greatest ever player, it must use the £33 million it earns from Wimbledon each year more wisely and perhaps now involve Murray in the running of the sport.
The headlines again. MPs will vote on a motion of no confidence in the government in the next half hour, triggered after last night's resounding defeat of Theresa May's Brexit deal. In a Commons debate, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn accused the Prime Minister of leading a zombie government and called on her to resign. In response, Mrs May ruled out a general election, saying one would only deepen division and cause delay when the country needed to move forward. A pilot has gone on trial accused of killing 11 people when his vintage fighter jet crashed during the Shoreham air show in 2015. The Kenyan Red Cross says dozens of people are still missing after the attack on a hotel and office complex in Nairobi. BBC News.